When a new map comes out and you're not sure how to play it, most people will go see what the pros are doing. But what if the map is so new that nobody has played it yet, and so there's no established meta and no good examples of what strategies are good to copy? Every single time a new map comes out, this is where I start. In a strategy board like Valoplant or Tactival, where I will just kind of look at the shape of the map, see where the distances are between the barriers and the orbs and the other team, and just kind of try to understand what the map is asking me to do. And another thing that I think is really useful to do is just to kind of like see if there's things that look familiar in terms of different shapes or geometry or angles or lanes on the map. And the first thing that really stood out to me about Summit is that it feels like the two sites are very far apart from each other. And this is something that's sort of reminiscent of a map like maybe Pearl or potentially even something like an Abyss, where the rotation from A site to B site seems like it's going to take a very long time. And what that immediately tells me is that this is a map where not only is rotating through middle very, very important, because going the long way is basically just completely taking yourself out of the round, but it also means that agents that have the ability to globally affect the map are probably going to go up in value. And this is something that we see on a map like Abyss or Pearl, where Astra is really the only viable solo controller because of her ability to smoke any distance away from her body. And those long rotations also mean that the attackers are probably going to have a numbers advantage a lot of the time if they go for some sort of fast hit or are able to draw the defenders to one side of the map and then group up and quickly go to the other side of the map. The next thing that I'm going to look at is actually the placement of ultimate orbs. And who has the advantage of getting to the orbs is one of the best ways to kind of think about whether a map is going to be attack or defensive sided, just in general, and also just in terms of who can control the ultimate economy. So on B, for example, the defense just starts being able to see the orb, and on A, it's pretty similar. So that is important to know because that means that both orbs are probably slightly defensive sided. And why this is so important is if you're picking an agent like a Phoenix that is very reliant on his ultimate, then it might not be as easy as you think to farm the ults and get value out of the agent. So just to clear this first little corner, I might have to either dry swing and hope that there's no operator or trap play waiting for me, or I might just have to use a piece of utility just to get access to see the orb. And then from there, I have to clear some corners, potentially expend, a piece of initiator utility or even a smoke before I feel comfortable actually picking up this orb to farm my first ult point. And the same thing goes for A, which is I think probably the easier orb to farm. You can jump up here and get early eyes on where the orb is going to be. But to actually claim this as an attacker, you have to be a little bit careful of these different angles, the potential for trap plays, mollies. There's all sorts of utility that can make this part of the map kind of unplayable. And then to claim it, you can just grab it quickly, but this wall, this corner is somewhat spammable, so you have to be very, very careful. So the next thing that I really like to do is think about smokes and what sort of early round smokes or late round smokes make a lot of sense. And sticking on this A orb as an example, this smoke right here is super obvious, right? Because it creates a bit of a one-way. It helps you control this orb on defense, and it cuts off this potentially strong attacker's angle that allows you to see over this box. And then just in general, looking at sort of the range of smokes is going to also affect how you have to play the map. Like if I'm Omen and I'm playing over on B side, can I smoke for A? And the answer is no. I kind of have to run out into the open to potentially help my team and maybe even run all the way over here before I can actually drop a smoke to smoke main. And so if I do want to play an agent like Omen or even the shorter ranged Brimstone or Clove, then I probably need to consider having a second smoker, whether that be a Viper or an agent that can create some kind of vision block like a Sage or potentially a Cypher, so that I can have them on the other side of the map because I know that I can't smoke quickly enough to respond to an enemy push. A few other things that I really like to consider are just sort of like the different power weapon positions. Obviously, an operator can play a very big role on how the defense and attack plays. And so looking for good positions and good lines to hold at long distance with the op is super strong, or potentially spam lines with the Odin or a Judge. Now, on this map, I would say that I don't actually think that the really aggressive op lines are super good. Like this is not great because people can come from a variety of different angles, so you'd actually have to push all the way through, and then even this line is like not that strong because there's so many different nooks and crannies for a lurker to hide in. And the same thing is kind of true on B. This line is decent and could be a pretty strong way to control the B side of the map for an agent like Chamber or Jet, you know, stand out here, take your shot and get out. But if you do want more aggressive positioning, like let's say that there is noise on the A side of the map, if you push all the way out here, this is fine, but again, it's pretty dangerous. Even just behind this box, somebody could be tucked. And so you would really have to actually kind of push all the way over here to get like really good information with the operator, which is super dangerous and requires quite a bit of risk. And so I think probably the best op lines are going to be a little bit more passive, you know, stuff from bottom middle like this, or even potentially really deep on site on some sort of like off angles like over here, or even A side of the map all the way back in spawn. And what that means to me is that you don't necessarily need an agent that is like really escapable. So a Chamber or a Jet actually becomes a little bit less important in terms of priority because you can play in a little bit safer positions if you do want to op on the defense. And before we actually start building a comp, I just want to touch on two more points, which are planting the spike and the map's gimmick, which is in this case the breakable doors. So as far as the doors go, I think it's kind of a complex decision to make in a lot of cases, and it kind of depends on your comp, and it kind of depends on what's going on in the round. For me, I think this A door is probably the most no-brainer. Usually you should be breaking this just because these extra angles that you're exposed to if you're trying to scale out on attack is going to make this really hard, and it's also going to make the retake way, way, way more difficult for the defenders. So I think most of the time you're probably supposed to break this door on the attack side. Now the middle door is really interesting because honestly, I feel like mid kind of favors the attackers in a lot of ways. There's a lot of places where you can lurk up and kind of insert. And so for the middle, it's almost more of a danger to leave this open for the defense, especially if you're having to rotate through the middle of the map in spawn. Like, I think if you're holding bottom middle and then you realize that you need to go A, it's probably correct a lot of the time to actually come up here and break the door as you rotate, because this is going to cut off one of the potential lurk paths, especially if you don't have the ability to easily clear middle. The B door is probably the most complex door as far as decisions go, because it's going to really depend on like how quickly you get control of the site. I think, for example, if you are getting stalled in main, you probably want to break this door to just get rid of, you know, an extra couple of angles that you have to watch for. But if you're able to actually get out onto site and then get up here, then this is a super strong position to play post plant from, right? It allows you to just watch like all the way almost to the A side of the map, and you have a really, really good tall angle to then watch people trying to retake from. That gives you quite a bit of cover to play from and really allows you to kind of control the site. Now, another thing that breaking this door does is I would also say it kind of makes the retake easier if you're not playing aggressively on site, because it allows for, you know, a team that has some good retake utility to potentially just scale up here, get into a pretty good position, sort of like almost inserted into the back lines of your post plant, and then set up for some sort of like paranoia or, you know, any other form of utility that they can maybe throw through the window. So I think that if you close this, it's really important for you to play in this sort of drop area. In fact, it's very similar to how drop would play for Lotus, and you probably still have like a pretty good angle on people that are scaling up into heaven. And if you don't control this, just like on Lotus, if you don't control drop, then your post plant is going to be significantly weaker. Okay, so now let's talk about planting the spike. Let's say that you get control of the A side of the map and you are able to potentially plant the spike. Where should you do that? Well, the A site is tiny, and for me, I think you should probably never play post plant on A site. For the most part, I think you need to be playing post plant off site and probably, you know, controlling this garden area, potentially with like a sage wall here, and, you know, just trying to get people to flood through these choke points that you can slow and, you know, play these kind of angles. So if you're not playing post plant on the site itself, where should you plant to give the best access for potential lurkers or people that are fighting off site to stop a defuse? Now, the most likely lurk path is probably going to be through here. So when this lurker is, you know, potentially closing in on a diffuser, where is he going to be able to shoot them from? Just right here. You plant, it gives you a little bit of cover behind this box. You plant like this, and this angle will be fairly accessible to somebody lurking through middle, and also somebody potentially lurking all the way through spawn if you need to, or if you're playing cave, you can still spam through this box. And then even just anybody kind of playing out in main is going to have a fairly quick swing to see the spike. It might not be the perfect plant spot, but for me, it makes quite a bit of sense to do something like that. The B side of the map is definitely a bit more complicated, and it's going to depend on what your plan is in the post plan itself. And so you really need to kind of think about like where your teammates are, who's alive, what utility you have, and whether somebody is lurking. Like for example, if you do have somebody lurking, you probably don't want to be planning over here because it's completely inaccessible to anybody that would be coming from middle, and pretty much everything that is protecting you from the mid lurk, who would be coming from here, is going to be non-spammable. It may even just be the case that planting like right here in the middle is good, and breaking this door is probably going to be really important so that you don't just have somebody up there spamming you through a smoke when you're trying to plant directly in their sightline. Okay, so we have to talk about middle, because the devs were talking about how you should definitely be fighting for this area of the map. And while that might be true for some comps, I don't necessarily think it's always the case that you need to be dedicating a lot of time and resources to middle. It really depends on what your comp is trying to do. When I look at middle, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Pearl. And let me explain why. If you're an attacker and you take control of the middle of the map, you now have gained access to multiple other lanes that then go to the site. However, these lanes are actually not that good for the attackers, especially this one, the street lane that a lot of people seem to like to do, is really, really, really bad to send a lot of people through on the attack, because the choke points are really, really small and very easy for a single defender to watch or stall you out with a single molly or other piece of utility. But if you spend a lot of resources taking the middle of the map, you haven't actually gained that much more map control, and you still have to fight through, you know, a multi sort of layered corridor to the site itself before you're able to plant. And I can definitely see a similar sort of pattern happening on Summit, because if you do fight and win this, yes, you do have access to now all of these extra sort of lanes to the site, but just look at some of the choke points that you have to go through to get there, right? I think that the A side of the map is probably the easier one, going like this. But going through middle, if you get up here and you go across towards B site, unless you break this door, there's a bunch of sort of backstab angles. Coming through here is another potential, you know, 50-50 angle. There's some tight choke points if you actually are trying to get into their spawn. And then you have to fight through yet another choke point into sort of another 50-50 angle before you can even get to the site to plant. So I think that the middle of the map, kind of like on Pearl, is better used to insert a lurker or somebody who's kind of in a deep position like this, or this, who can hear the rotations, but you're probably not supposed to send a bunch of your players through the middle of the map, because it just puts you in a weird position where you're spending a lot of utility and potentially dying to get control of a part of the map that doesn't even actually let you plant the spike. If you are going to go fast, I think that this is probably your best option if you're trying to split A, for example. But even then, it is just a pretty dangerous prospect. And so I think controlling middle is important, but I don't think you're supposed to be rushing through middle. And I think another really similar pattern with how middle works on Summit is just like, if you're a defender and you're playing towards middle, then you really do want to try to rotate through middle if possible. But it's a dangerous rotation because you're going to expose yourself to all sorts of different angles or lurk positions for the attack. And so you have to really kind of consider how you're going to rotate through middle if you want to do that. Otherwise, you just have to take the much slower and safer route to get to the other side of the map. So all of that sort of means that you don't necessarily want to commit heavy to holding middle, but you definitely want to be checking it, and you need to be able to control it with smokes and potentially utility. So an agent like Fade could be great to play here, because if you're worried about a lurker, you can maybe just throw a prowler out like this and then potentially rotate over to the B side of the map. Another agent that I've been really interested in using on this map is Viper, and the reason for that is because Viper simplifies your mid rotation quite a bit. And what I mean by that is if you want to go from B to A, you can just put up the wall, which is going to cut off basically every angle that somebody could be holding and waiting for you. And all you have to do is kind of check this and then just make your rotation. So it makes the rotation much safer from B to A or A to B if you have a Viper wall that you can cut off all these angles with. And so let's actually get into the agents. And I'm going to just start with Viper because I think she is one of the more powerful agents in the game and really kind of can dictate how you play the rest of your comp if you have a Viper on your team. So one of the things I really like about Viper is that you can actually claim one of the orbs for yourself. There's no real good wall to do this on B, but on A, if you do a wall like this, where you're able to actually put the A orb on this side of your Viper wall, then you kind of steal control of this orb from the defense. And this is going to allow you to also potentially get up into a position like this, drop the wall, maybe catch somebody off guard, or even just do something as simple as put up the wall, cross to the other side over here, and then you can kind of set a trap for the defenders who might be pushing out to try and control this orb. And then if you play with a little bit more balls, you can even just kind of swing this. There's only really one angle to check because you've isolated the rest of the garden area. So if there's nobody here, you can also just kind of cross over here, put down the wall, and now you've got a pretty nice default position where you can swing out, break the door, and then potentially, fight into the rest of garden from multiple different angles at once if your team comes and joins you. And you could combo this wall with a orb for bottom middle, which is going to allow you to better control middle, potentially lurk up. You only have to worry about over here. You could get inserted deep into bottom middle like this and hide from anybody trying to re-clear from the A side of the map, and come through, potentially sneak through like this. So Viper really does a lot of things that I like, such as simplifying your rotations on defense, offering some stall potential, which is I think going to be really important just because of how long the rotations are. Of course, the ability to globally affect the map with your utility depending on where you want to play, and all of the attack-sided lurk potential that Viper gives you as well, I think is pretty high value on this map. So for fun, let's go ahead and build a Viper comp, and then we'll build a more aggressive comp as well, so you have two different options. So if we're going to play Viper, we definitely need a second controller, and I like to go to the stats and just see what synergizes best with Viper. Realistically, our choices are probably going to be something like Astra or Omen. It might be a player preference or player comfort situation. I think it's maybe fair to throw a couple other ones in there just because it's a new map and anything can work potentially. But when you're picking agents, you definitely want to consider sort of like, does the agent fit what that map is asking me to do? And so if I'm playing attack, I probably want to have some explosivity. I probably want to have some early ability to take some map control. I may need some ability to sort of brute force some space if I want to go fast or if I need to fight for middle. And then if I'm playing on defense, I probably want to be able to help my teammates across the map. I definitely want to be able to stall out the choke points because there are some pretty small choke points that a Molly or a Paranoia or a Gravity Well could have a lot of effect in. And you definitely need to have stall potential because your teammates are going to take a long time to rotate. So just to keep things simple, let's go with the Omen. And Omen gives us a couple of things. It's a little bit of an initiator, a little bit of a duelist, so we can probably get away with playing single duelist with this comp. We might not even necessarily need a flash because Omen can kind of flash and brute force space with his Paranoia. And that opens up a few different options for us as well. And then we can go back to the stats if we want to. We can maybe start thinking about what duelist we would like to play or what initiator or what sentinel. For me, I'm going to go for sentinel next just because I think it's going to be a really important choice on this map. If we're playing the Viper, I probably want to pair that with something like a Vice or potentially a Killjoy just because I think that having the Orb plus a Molly or a Thorns is very, very strong. And you definitely need some information holding tools on this map because right now we just have two smokes, which is, it's great for stalling, but you don't necessarily know what's going on. So I think our options realistically are probably Killjoy, Cypher, and Vice. You can maybe throw a Veto in there if the meta was right, but I think it's really going to be one of these three agents. And I like all three of them for different reasons. So let's look at Vice as an example. I think you probably can get away with a pretty good wall like this. Definitely thorns to stall out some fast rush on the A side of the map. You can obviously put your arc rows somewhere back here and fight off of this as well. It seems pretty strong to me. Also, just the fact that Vice has the ability to potentially thorn both sides of the map, so I could start off every single round like this, and then go over and play on the A side of the map, and then I have stalled out potential over on B, and then I also have my setup on A, which I think is pretty good as well. So if I'm worried about like fast and aggressive metas, I definitely might want to play the Vice. Another option is of course Killjoy, and if I'm going to play Killjoy, I probably want to sort of think about how I want to hold information with the turret. So something kind of passive and top middle maybe gives me a decent bit of information on potential lurkers, and then I can focus my resources on holding the actual choke point for main with maybe an alarm bot and some mollies, or if I feel like I can push up for extra space because there's a bunch of noise A, then maybe I can throw my alarm bot up here for some extra information and early warning. Obviously something with Killjoy that's really important is like the ultimate, and I think that it can be pretty good on retake. Specifically, like if the attackers are always closing the doors, then it gives you kind of a free ultimate there. Then you get kind of perfect ultimates for the A side of the map as well. So Killjoy does seem pretty strong as far as retake goes. On the attack side, you could maybe play some post-plant mollies, and of course you have the ability to hold multiple lanes with your turret and scout out middle with your turret against oppers and stuff like that, which could be pretty strong. So I definitely think Killjoy has some validity as well. And then I think the agent I'm probably not going to be playing if I'm playing double controller with a Viper is going to be Cypher. So realistically, my choice is between Vice and Killjoy. I'm going to go with Vice just because I like the agent personally. So now we've got a really solid core of really good defense, I think, really good control of the choke points, and now we definitely need to focus on how are we going to attack. And I think realistically, we're probably going to end up in some sort of Lotus type comp here, because if we're trying to work the map with Viper's Wall and, you know, really kind of like spread the defense thin by pushing and pulling them and making them do this long rotation, then we want to think about agents that have quite a bit of sort of reclear utility. So something like a Sky or a Fade comes to mind. And for the duelist, we definitely want somebody that can play sort of this slower tempo game, but has the ability to pop when necessary. So I'm definitely looking at an agent like a Raze, potentially a Yoru, or potentially a Waylay. I think I would probably stay away from a Jet. Neon is possible as well, although I think I would prefer to play Neon double duelist on this map. And then obviously you don't want something like a Phoenix or a Reyna who has to just like run through every choke point, because especially on this map where there are so many choke points, having the ability to burst when necessary I think is going to be kind of important. And this is where I'll hop back into the comp builder, and let's say that we've decided that we're going to go with Vice. So we've got Omen, Viper, Vice, and now we need to start thinking about our, you know, Initiator and Duelist. We can see that Neon has decent synergy with these three, Raze has decent synergy with these three, Yoru's a little bit negative. And so let's go ahead and just throw the Raze in there, because I think it fits pretty well. And then for an Initiator, Sky, Fade, the choice is, you know, it's kind of up to you. If you really want to play with some extra flashes, I think Sky is fine, but we can just go ahead and throw the Fade in there. You can see that the synergy is relatively good if we want to play a Viper style. Now, let's real quick do a double duelist version of this. Just for me, I think the best duelist on this map, sort of just in a vacuum, is probably going to be either Neon or Yoru. I'm just going to go ahead and put Neon out there because I think that it's an agent that people are familiar with and can play relatively well at this point. And we want to pair this with a secondary duelist that has either the ability to dive in first and allow the Neon to trade, or to trade off of the Neon and maybe, you know, flash and fight. And so I think you're looking at potentially a Yoru, a Phoenix, or maybe a Waylay. I would probably prefer to play the Yoru just because I'm a Yoru fan. I think most people will probably just play the Phoenix, so I'm going to put both of them out there. And then if we're playing double duelist, I think the very, very obvious thing here is we have to play with a lot of information, because if you're playing double duelist, you need to be fighting aggressively for space, whether that's in one of the mains or out into middle. And that means that you need to be holding the rest of the map with as much informational utility as possible so that your double duelist can show in one place and then quickly move to the other side of the map if there's nobody there. And you can really only do that if you have the informational tools to enable it. And so I think you're probably going to want to pair this with a Cypher. Cypher also does for us is it allows us to maybe not play the Astra if we don't have somebody comfortable on the agent, because Cypher does have sort of like a smoke proxy ability in the cage that you can use to anchor on defense and delay a push. So now I'm going to hop over here. I'm just going to put in Neon. I'm going to put in Yoru. I'm going to put in Cypher and just see what smoke agent maybe makes the most sense. Well, Astra does have pretty good synergy. Harbor, Mix, Clove, all of them could potentially work. Me personally, I still do think that Astra is probably the best smoker on this map. So I'm going to go ahead and throw Astra in there. It pairs pretty well with a Yoru. It pairs pretty well with a Neon as well. And now we just need an Initiator. And this is where things get a little interesting. So I think with this comp, I probably would just go with the Sova because the shock darts are going to allow me to break, you know, trips or mollies or whatever utility might be stopping my Neon running in. The recon dart pairs really well with a Yoru Neon execute, and the agent is just good, especially if the meta does kind of shake out where people are playing with a lot of operator on this map. Then the drone is just the best tool that you have against operators. The one thing that does worry me a little bit with Sova is that you don't have that much sort of informational clearing tools for middle. If you use the drone to clear this out, then you don't have another one. And so that might cause some problems against teams that are playing a little bit slower. So it might be kind of meta dependent where like if you really need to deal with middle a lot, just play the Fade or the Sky. If you feel like the operator is going to be a problem, play the Sova. Or if you just have, you know, specific agent comfort needs, just play the Sova as well. I also think that if I'm going to play the Phoenix, I probably just play the Fade so that I can do Molly Seas combos as well. And so, you know, there's a few different options that you have. This would be sort of my more controlled, passive style push and pull comp. And this would be my more explosive, let's kind of run it down and play aggressively type of comp. And I think both of them can work. And there's probably also some double sentinel and other types of crazy comps that will work as well. And it's really just kind of up to you to be creative with the map because there is no meta. So you can make it yourself depending on how you interpret the map and what is important on it.